The morning sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban street where Harold lived with his teenage son Michael. At 58, Harold had learned that life rarely unfolds the way you expect it to, and sometimes the most beautiful chapters begin when you think the book is nearly finished. He had been widowed for 3 years now and had found peace in the simple rhythms of his days. Working at the local hardware store where people knew his name and trusted his advice about fixing things that seemed beyond repair. Michael was 17 and preparing for college, which meant their small house would soon feel even quieter than it already did. Harold tried not to think about that too much. On this particular Saturday morning, Harold was tinkering with an old lawnmower in his garage when he heard the distinctive sound of a motorcycle engine sputtering to a stop somewhere nearby. He paused and listened as the engine tried to turn over again and again, each attempt weaker than the last. Harold wiped his hands on an old drag and stepped outside to see where the sound was coming from. About 3 houses down, he spotted a woman standing beside a classic motorcycle, looking somewhat perplexed. She appeared to be around his age, with silver-streaked hair pulled back simply and wearing well-worn jeans and a leather jacket that had seen many miles. There was something about their way she stood there studying the machine that reminded Harold of his late wife Emma, who had never been afraid to get her hands dirty when something needed fixing. Harold found himself walking toward her before he had really decided to do so, having some trouble that he called out as he approached. The woman looked up and Harold noticed she had kind eyes, though there was a weariness in them that spoke of someone who had been carrying burdens alone for too long. "I'm afraid so," she said with a slight smile that didn't quite mask her frustration. "I thought I could make it to the next town, but apparently this old girl had other plans." Harold introduced himself and learned that her name was Catherine. She explained that she had been traveling for several weeks now, visiting small towns and staying in local bed and breakfasts. "I've been trying to slow down lately," she said, looking at the motorcycle with genuine affection. This seemed like the perfect way to do it, but I suppose I should have had her looked at before I left home. Harold knelt down beside the motorcycle and began examining the engine. His hands moved with the confidence of someone who had spent decades solving problems through patience and practical knowledge. "When did she last have a tune-up?" he asked. Catherine looked embarrassed. "Honestly, I'm not sure, well, the person who usually takes care of these things for me has been handling that, and we haven't spoken in quite some time." Harold nodded without prying further. He had learned that sometimes people needed space to share what they were comfortable sharing and nothing more. As he worked, Catherine began talking about her journey. She had grown up in this part of the country, she explained, but had moved away decades ago for work. "I built something successful," she said carefully, "but somewhere along the way I think I lost track of what actually mattered." Harold listened while his hands continued their methodical work. "After my husband passed 2 years ago, I realized I had forgotten how to have a conversation with someone who didn't want something from me," Catherine continued, "so I decided to take this trip to remember what real people and real places feel like." Harold understood that feeling of loss in ways he suspected she might not expect. "My Emma died 3 years ago," he said simply. "Cancer." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry." "Thank you," Harold replied. "She would have liked you. I think she always said the best people are the ones willing to get their hands dirty." He had found the problem now. A clogged fuel line that would be simple enough to fix with the right tools. "I can get this running for you," he said, "but it'll take me a bit to get the parts and clean everything out properly. Would you like some coffee while we wait?" Catherine looked surprised. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Harold said gently, "but it's Saturday morning and I was just puttering around anyway. Besides, my son Michael is inside, probably still sleeping, and he should meet someone who's actually seen the world beyond this town." They spent the morning in Harold's kitchen drinking coffee and talking. Catherine told them about places she had visited on her journey. Small diners where the pie was made fresh every morning, bed and breakfasts run by couples who had been married for 40 years, roadside stands where farmers sold vegetables they had grown with their own hands. Michael eventually wandered downstairs still in his pajamas, and after the initial awkwardness of meeting a stranger in his kitchen began asking Catherine questions about her travels. Harold watched his son's face light up as Catherine described the different places she had seen and the people she had met. He realized it had been a long time since Michael had talked to an adult who wasn't a teacher or coach or parent of one of his friends. Someone who could show him that there were different ways to live and different paths to choose from. While Harold worked on the motorcycle in the garage, Catherine and Michael sat on the front porch talking. Harold could hear their conversation drifting in, Catherine asking Michael about his plans for college and Michael asking her about what it was like to live in different places. "You know," Catherine said, "I've been thinking lately about what advice I would give to someone your age." Harold paused in his work to listen. "I used to think success meant climbing higher and faster than everyone else," she continued, "but I've learned that the most successful people I know are the ones who never forgot how to be kind to strangers." Harold smiled as he cleaned the fuel line. Emma would definitely have liked this woman. When the motorcycle was finally running smoothly again, Catherine insisted on paying Harold for his time and parts. He refused, of course, explaining that neighbors help neighbors and she was welcome to consider herself a neighbor for as long as she was in town. "At least let me take you both out to dinner," Catherine said. "There's only one restaurant in town worth visiting," Harold replied, "and it happens to be run by my sister-in-law, so you'd be doing me a favor by letting me introduce you." That evening at dinner, Harold watched Catherine charm his sister-in-law Martha with stories from her journey. Martha was naturally suspicious of strangers, but within minutes she was laughing and asking Catherine if she had room in her schedule to stay another day or two. "We don't get many interesting visitors around here," Martha explained. Catherine looked at Harold. "Would that be an imposition? If I stayed a bit longer I could help out around your place, return the favor somehow." Harold found himself hoping she would stay, though he wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe it was the way Michael had smiled more today than he had in weeks, or maybe it was how natural it felt to have another person to cook breakfast for. "You're welcome as long as you'd like," he said, "though I should warn you it's pretty quiet around here." Catherine laughed. "Quiet sounds perfect." She ended up staying for 2 weeks. During that time she helped Harold organize his garage and plant a vegetable garden in his backyard. She taught Michael how to change the oil on the motorcycle and listened patiently while he worried about whether he was making the right choices about college. She and Harold fell into comfortable routines. Morning coffee on the front porch, evening walks around the neighborhood. They talked about their children and their marriages and the dreams they had put aside and the ones they were still hoping to pursue. Harold learned that Catherine had built a technology company from nothing and had recently sold it for what she described as more money than any reasonable person needs. She learned that Harold had once wanted to be an engineer but had stayed close to home to take care of his aging parents and had never regretted that choice. "I've been thinking," Catherine said on her last night, "about what comes next for me." They were sitting on the porch again watching the sunset. "I have enough money to do whatever I want, but I've realized I don't want much, just a place where I belong and people who care whether I come home at night." Harold felt something shift in his chest, something that had been closed for 3 years beginning to open. "Home is where people notice when you're gone," he said quietly. Catherine turned to look at him. "Is that an invitation?" Harold met her eyes. "If you'd like it to be." The next morning Catherine didn't pack her motorcycle. Instead she called a real estate agent about the little house 2 streets over that had been for sale since spring. She also called her lawyer about setting up a foundation to help small towns maintain their local businesses and support families like Harold's who formed the backbone of their communities. "I've learned something important on this trip," she told Harold as they watched Michael load his belongings into his car for college. "Kindness isn't just something nice people do, it's how we build the world we want to live in." Harold nodded. "Emma used to say that the best investment you can make is in the person standing right in front of you." 6 months later Harold and Catherine were married in a small ceremony at Martha's restaurant. Michael came home from college for the wedding and gave a speech about how his father had taught him that sometimes the most important thing you can do is help a stranger fix their motorcycle. "Because you never know," he said with a grin. That stranger might just be exactly what your family needs. As Harold listened to his son speak, he thought about the morning he had first heard Catherine's motorcycle break down. He had walked toward that sound without knowing where it would lead him, but trusting that someone needed help and he had help to offer. Sometimes, Harold reflected, the most profound changes in our lives begin with the simplest acts of kindness. And sometimes the person we're meant to find finds us first.